Hi, I'm Doug Hayhoe, and I've written a series of short video essays and podcasts on science, faith, and other topics. Most of the episodes relate to one of God's two books, Nature or Scripture. This one is called Dating the Earth. Did you know that the idea of the Earth being only 6,000 years old is actually a relatively recent concept? It wasn't until the 1600s that Bishop Ussher, a scholar and archbishop in the Church of Ireland, decided that Adam was created on October the 28th, 4004 BC, based on the ages of people and length of royal reigns in the Bible. He concluded that the universe must have been created 6 days earlier, on October the 22nd, 4004 BC, based on Genesis 1. For the next century or two, the general populace took this date as given. The discovery of ancient fossils and geological deposits in the early 1800s, however, made most people realize that the Earth must be a lot older. How could we reconcile this discrepancy between what science was revealing and what the Bible taught? In 1814, a Church of Scotland minister, Thomas Chalmers, resurrected an older interpretation of Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 and 2, known as the gap theory. This theory suggests that there must have been a lot going on between verses 1 and 2 in the Bible. While verse 1 says that God created the heaven and the earth, which we would assume to be perfectly formed, verse 2 says the earth was formless and empty. Now this gap could be hundreds of thousands or even 1,000,000 years in length, long enough to fit any geological evidence being discovered in the 1800s. However, by the end of the 1800s, scientists began to realize that the earth must be billions, not millions of years old. One of the most significant breakthroughs in the study of the age of the Earth came from the discovery of radioactivity. Radioactivity is the property of certain isotopes to spontaneously emit energy and particles from their atomic nucleus as they undergo decay. The rate of decay can be described with a half-life, the time it takes for half of the original sample to decay. Radioactivity was discovered in 1896. And it took scientists less than a decade to realize it could be used to determine the age of rocks on the Earth. One of these scientists was the famous nuclear physicist Ernest Rutherford, who worked at McGill University in Montreal during his peak years of discovery. One of the most common methods of radioactive dating is potassium-argon dating. Potassium is a common element present in our bodies. It has 19 electrons in constant motion around its nucleus, and 19 protons inside its nucleus. Normally, there are also 20 neutrons in its nucleus, so its atomic mass is 39. However, some potassium isotopes have one extra neutron in their nucleus, making them unstable. Over time, they decay into argon. Here's the decay chain symbolized. I'll just explain this here. So potassium, that's K, potassium-40, has 19 protons. So its atomic number at the bottom left is 19. But it also has 21 neutrons. So you add that together, and its atomic mass, the number at the top left, is 40. It has 40 heavy particles in its nucleus. The electrons are very tiny and don't weigh much. But potassium-40 is not stable. Every so often, a proton in its nucleus gives off a beta particle that takes away its positive charge. You can see that at the end of the arrow. That turns the proton into a neutron. So then the atom only has 18 protons, but it now has 22 neutrons. Well, this is a different element entirely. It's called argon, with 18 protons and 18 electrons. The half-life of the decay of potassium-40 to argon-40 is 1.25 billion years. It's a long time. By measuring the amount of potassium and argon in a rock sample, scientists can then determine the age of the rocks. For example, let's assume that a certain rock, when it was first formed, had some potassium-40 in it, but no argon-40. But now we find out by testing that 3/4 of the potassium-40 has turned into argon-40. This means it has gone through two half-life periods. Half of the potassium-40 decayed in the first 1.25 billion years, and half of the potassium-40 left, half of half, in the next 1.25 billion years. So the rock must be 2.5 billion years old if it only has a quarter of the original potassium-40 left and 3/4 argon, 2.5 billion years old. There are many other types of radioactive dating in use today, and together they provide irrefutable evidence that Earth is very ancient. Ernest Rutherford's genius lay in immediately recognizing this over 100 years ago, soon after radioactivity had been discovered. Today we have the uranium-235 to lead-206 decay chain with a half-life of 704 million years, for example. And then we have the carbon-14 dating with a half-life of just 5,730 years. In the first half of the 20th century, however, several people resurrected arguments for a 6,000-year-old Earth. A Seventh-day Adventist teacher, George McCready Price, made these arguments popular, but they were not accepted by the vast majority of geologists. The hydraulics engineering professor Henry Morris and theologian John C. Whitcomb, however, did accept them and popularized them in their 1961 book, The Genesis Flood. I read The Genesis Flood during my years of studying physics. Over the years since, I've kept in touch with the arguments of more current advocates of a young Earth and universe, such as Ken Ham. As a physics graduate and science educator, I can confidently say that the evidence both for a young Earth and for a young universe fails miserably. While there may be one or two Christian astronomers who believe in a young universe, there are thousands of astronomers who are convinced that the universe is ancient, and hundreds of them are Christians. Likewise, there are hundreds of Christian geologists who believe that the Earth is ancient. I've spent many summers north of Toronto on the Canadian Shield, an ancient rock formation that spans half of our country. Here is a map of Canada with the ancient rocks in the Canadian Shield colored brown and red. There you can see that spanning half of Canada. Really a wonderful place. These rocks in the Canadian Shield have been carefully tested and dated by thousands of geology students and professors. It is no longer in dispute that they date back from 2.5 to 4.2 billion years. Now, this great age has never bothered me as a Bible-believing Christian. I've always known this was nothing compared to my Creator's eternal existence. When I observe the galaxies up north in the evenings through my telescope, I'm again reminded of their great age. Yet, I distinctly feel God speaking to me personally through his magnificent and ancient creation, whether in the sky or in the rocks. For as King David put it so aptly many years ago in Psalm 19, the heavens, i.e. the stars, declare the glory of God, and the earth, i.e. the rocks, show his handiwork. More recently, Brian Dirksen has expressed this quite beautifully in his 2002 hymn, Faithful One, so unchanging, ageless One, you're my rock of peace. Lord of all, I depend on you. I call out to you again and again. In fact, as St. Augustine observed 1,600 years ago, time is irrelevant to God because he exists outside of it. That's why Moses said, speaking to God, 1,000 years in your sight are like a watch in the night, in Psalm 90. And when Moses had almost finished writing his 5 books of the law, he encouraged us with this reminder, quote, the eternal God is our refuge, and underneath are the everlasting arms. That's in Deuteronomy chapter 33. Thank you for listening. For more details, please see the written essay on my website.